There are lives that leave a mark long after the final curtain. On a tribute from Hollywood, we pause to honor the American talents we've said goodbye to and the international voices who shaped something lasting. If these tributes mean something to you, your generosity keeps this work going. Michael Pennington was 82 when he died, and his passing closed a chapter in British theatre that had no interest in being loud. His life was one of quiet devotion to the craft, to language, to the stage, to the idea that performance should mean something. That he came into the world in Cambridge in 1943, shaped by a theatrical tradition that treated Shakespeare not as a monument to be admired but as a living argument to be had. He wrestled with the text. He honored its weight. In 1986, alongside director Michael Bogdanov, he was among the founders of the English Shakespeare Company, a project built on the belief that the great plays could still speak to people in the modern world. For audiences of the 1970s and 1980s who cared deeply about the stage, this mattered enormously. Pennington was also a writer and director, a man far more drawn to the work itself than to the attention it might bring. Some performers become household names. Others earn something rarer, the deep and lasting respect of everyone who truly understands the art. He belonged entirely to that second group. And those legacies have a way of growing larger as the years pass. For millions of Americans who grew up with the television running in the background, the Osmond family was part of the furniture of daily life. The harmonies, the coordinated outfits, the sheer relentless presence of them through the 1970s, they were everywhere, and somehow they endured when most acts like them did not. Wayne Osmond, one of the original Osmond brothers, has died at 73. His family shared the news in the way grief often presents itself now, quietly, without performance. Just wait. People remember the big moments easily enough. One bad apple. The variety show appearances. The magazines. The screaming fans. But Wayne always carried himself a little differently from the spectacle surrounding him. Softer somehow. Less consumed by the machinery of fame. More interested in the people beside him than in the cameras pointing at him. And life asked more of him than most fans knew at the time. He faced years of serious health struggles, a brain tumor among them, and a stroke that eventually took away his ability to perform in the way he once had. He showed up anyway, when he was able. His family, his faith, these were never secondary things. They were the center. Losing someone tied that closely to a particular stretch of American life carries a grief that goes beyond the personal. It's also the feeling of watching a whole era grow quieter, the couch beside a parent, the holiday specials, the evenings that felt different than they do now. Robert Duvall always seemed like someone you'd encountered before, even in your first film with him. Even playing dangerous or broken men, men full of anger they couldn't name, he felt familiar. Grounded. Real in the way most actors spend their whole careers chasing. He has passed away at 95. His death came after years spent largely away from Hollywood itself, living out his later life on a Virginia property that suited him far better than red carpets ever had. Looking back now, it's nearly impossible to picture American cinema without him somewhere inside it. People reach for different films when they remember him. The Godfather, Tom Hagen sitting perfectly still while violence gathered around him. Lonesome Dove, which still holds enormous meaning for anyone raised on westerns and stories about endurance. And Tender Mercies in 1983, the film that finally handed him the Academy Award after years of performances that had already more than earned one. The genius was that he never appeared to be working. That was the trick, nothing performed, nothing strained, just the plain and unadorned truth of a human being in a room. What stayed with audiences over time was how little interest he had in being a celebrity. He loved tango. He loved ranch life. He had no patience for the hollow rituals of fame. Even in old interviews, you could sense it, a man who genuinely didn't need you to think he was important. And perhaps that is exactly why his loss feels so personal to older Americans. Because Robert Duvall aged in front of them, decade after decade, until one day it becomes clear that the people who carried whole generations of American film are quietly becoming memory. Sally did not arrive in the world with the ease that people later imagined when they saw her laugh on television. She was born November 6, 1946, in Pasadena, California, right in the middle of that peculiar post-war American optimism, when everything was supposed to look bright and orderly from the outside. But her childhood was not orderly. Her parents separated while she was still very young. And children who grow up inside that kind of fracture tend to develop a particular skill set, watching carefully, reading the air, understanding what the adults around them choose not to say out loud. Her mother, Margaret Field, was an actress, talented and beautiful. But home was complicated. There was charm in her world, yes, but also loneliness, confusion, fear that hadn't yet found its name. In a way, the actress was born there, not on a stage or under lights, but in those quiet rooms where a small girl was learning how to survive. How to make a smile do the work of something heavier. How to be whatever the people around her needed her to be. There's something that aches in that now, knowing what came later, that America would meet her as Gidget, radiant and sun-drenched, carrying what looked like pure joy. But before that joy, there was a child figuring out how to endure. And she did not harden. That may be the most remarkable thing. She became watchful, and then she became strong, and eventually she became someone who could carry the full weight of human feeling and make millions of women feel, finally, understood. By the mid-1960s, television wanted a different kind of girl, young, fizzing with energy, modern in a way that the clean domestic dramas of the previous decade weren't. In 1965, Gidget introduced Sally Field to the country. She was 19. What audiences responded to immediately wasn't polish. It was that nervous electricity underneath her smile, the feeling of a young woman who hadn't entirely expected to be looked at. Young girls recognized it. Mothers recognized it. It felt true. Gidget itself was cancelled quickly. Another young actress might have dissolved after that. Hollywood erases women easily and always has. But Sally stayed. The Flying Nun followed in 1967, and her face was suddenly everywhere, magazines, living rooms, the glow of family television sets on weekday evenings. America loved what they saw. The problem was that Sally wasn't sure she loved what she was becoming. She has spoken openly since about how trapped she felt inside those cheerful roles. The world saw sweetness and left it at that. It missed the seriousness underneath. It missed the exhaustion. Because while the country watched her float across the screen in a nun's habit, Sally was privately tangled in a kind of insecurity that never fully releases. The fear of not being respected. The suspicion that people were amused by her rather than moved. Women of her generation likely understood that particular anxiety better than most, the pressure to stay pleasant, to keep smiling, to never let on that something inside felt unfinished. And yet, the warmth that cameras caught in those years wasn't manufactured. Behind all that bright studio lighting, there was already a woman quietly refusing to settle for the story the world had written for her. She just hadn't found her way to the next chapter yet. Somewhere in the 1970s, Sally Field made a decision. She was finished with being underestimated. Finished with cute. Finished with the idea that she was a lightweight television personality who would eventually be replaced by someone younger and shinier. Hollywood nearly convinced her that story was true. There were years, she has admitted, when the self-doubt was loud, shaped by childhood, amplified by fame, never fully quieted by success. But she kept working. Kept studying. Kept trying to uncover the actress she knew was in there beneath all the sitcom goodwill. Then came Sybil in 1976, and something broke open. Suddenly audiences could see pain in what she did. Fragmentation. Depth that no one had allowed her to show before. Critics revised their understanding of her almost overnight. And then Norma Ray in 1979, a Southern mill worker fighting for her dignity and her co-workers' rights. Raw. Physical. Unadorned. When she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, the emotion on her face wasn't glamorous or composed. It was the feeling of a woman who had spent years asking to be taken seriously and was barely able to believe that the room had, at last, listened. The famous moment came later, at the 1985 Oscars for Places in the Heart. You like me right now. You like me. That line got laughed at for decades, misread as vanity. It was never vanity. It was relief, the sound of someone who had spent most of her life waiting for love to stay. That fragility became the deepest part of her connection with women everywhere. Women who knew about divorce, about feeling invisible, about the quiet work of proving you matter. Sally never looked untouchable. She looked human. And by then, the people who had grown older alongside her weren't watching a sitcom girl anymore. They were watching someone who had learned how to survive. By the late 1980s, Sally Field had become something rare, not just admired, but trusted. Audiences believed her tears because they had earned the right to. Mothers saw themselves in her exhaustion. Men respected her strength without always understanding where it came from. But while the world saw confidence, Sally was still carrying damage from much earlier in her life. In her 2018 memoir, In Pieces, she finally spoke directly about painful experiences from childhood, the kind of writing that does not read like a typical celebrity book. It reads like someone setting down a weight they've been dragging for decades. The rawness is unmistakable. And suddenly certain things made sense. That particular trembling honesty beneath her lines, the sadness that always seemed to be hovering just behind her eyes. There was difficulty outside the work too. Marriages that didn't survive. The grinding pressure of raising children while navigating an industry with no patience for the full complexity of women. Motherhood became one of the deepest parts of who she was, she has said, fiercely felt, fiercely protected. But balancing all of it left marks. And then there was simply time itself. Hollywood can be merciless toward women as they age, especially women once celebrated for beauty and warmth. Fewer roles. Colder receptions. The silence where the phone used to ring. What Sally did instead was refuse to pretend. She aged without theater about aging. She let life show on her face. She spoke publicly and without embarrassment about her struggle with osteoporosis, a condition that touches millions of women and is almost never discussed honestly. That honesty created a different kind of bond with her audience. Not admiration from a distance. Recognition from very close. And she never disappeared into sadness. That matters. Through every quieter year, the intelligence in her eyes remained. The humor. The emotional alertness that had been with her since childhood, that watchfulness she'd learned in rooms that didn't protect her. After everything, the childhood pain, the insecurity, the pressure, the grief, she stayed soft. Not weak. Soft. There is an enormous difference. When audiences watch her now, they are not only watching a performance. They are watching a woman who stayed recognizable through every stage of life, still uncertain sometimes, still standing, still carrying all of it openly. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. Sally Field doesn't feel like someone sealed in the past. She feels like someone still walking alongside the people who loved her all those years ago, finding, even now, reasons to keep going. Dawson's Creek wasn't background noise for the generation that grew up with it. It arrived at a very specific moment, the late 1990s, small towns, young people treating every conversation about love and fear as though it might be the most important one they'd ever have. And James Van Der Beek was right at the center of it. James Van Der Beek has passed away at 48. The news stunned people who still associated him with youth, with that particular half-nervous smile of Dawson Leary standing by the water in Capeside, trying to figure out adulthood before it was gone. His family confirmed the loss privately, away from the kind of spectacle he never seemed comfortable with. And that discomfort was always part of what made people like him. After Dawson's Creek became a genuine cultural moment in 1998, he could have spent the rest of his life chasing that. Instead, he grew into something more self-aware, willing to joke about his own image, genuinely humble in a way that didn't feel like performance. In later years, after moving his family to Texas, he spoke more like a father trying to protect something quiet than like a celebrity trying to stay in frame. Audiences noticed the change and respected it. Some may remember him from films like Varsity Blues. But many more watched him simply grow up in public, marriage, children, the ordinary and difficult textures of real life, lived without much polish. There is a particular sadness in losing actors whose faces are permanently bound to the last era before everything became noise. When families still came together around the television each week. When certain characters felt genuinely woven into the rhythm of daily life. James Van Der Beek will likely stay frozen somewhere in that era for the people who loved him then, young, full of feeling, standing near the water while an entire generation watched alongside him.